Hello, and welcome to my presentation of my research proposal. The topic is the impact of removing racial stereotypes from consumer brands. And of course, my name is Grant Lawson. Let's get started by diving into the subject overview. So, looking at past literature, I've identified a few aspects that are interesting and apply to my research and that I think can be expanded on. So one major aspect is brand identity. Um, Studies have shown a direct correlation between positive positive recognition of brand signature, which is the logos and colors and typefaces, all of the above used by these brands, uh, and the connections with that with repurchase intention and things like that. So, if you're more connected to a strong brand signature, you may be more likely to purchase from that brand. Some researchers have gone so far as to say that developing a strong and consistent brand is the ultimate goal of any corporation, which is strong. Um, and so with that, rebranding, it occurs primarily to work towards a more lasting and stronger brand. You don't just rebrand for no reason. You rebrand because you want consumers to know something different about you, and to build something that is lasting, trying to reach for that goal. And so in 2020, several major consumer brands changed long-standing brands that were based in racial stereotypes. There's a list in my research, my written research proposal, and I'll cover two in this video. But most of them were sparked by the George Floyd protests. But these brands had lasted for sometimes decades and sometimes even centuries. So it is notable that this year they chose to rebrand. Research into these specific rebrandings is pretty sparse. Um, and so I think applying theories on agenda setting and framing to the news releases, as well as the press releases by the companies, and delving into brand identity and personal discussions with consumers on their impacts of these brands on their life and the rebrandings is valuable and is a major gap in existing research. So with all that background in mind, I've identified two primary research questions. The first is, how have food and beverage companies in the United States communicated the removal of racial stereotypes from their branding during and after 2020? And the second is, how have these changes impacted the perception of their brand among 18 to 22-year-olds? The first gets at the theories of framing and agenda setting, um, looking at how these brands communicated these changes. And the second half is more personal, looking at the impact that these had on the perception of these brands on young adults, who are a major audience of these brands. So for the purposes of this research proposal, I've identified two of these brands that, based on anecdotal coverage and some discussions, um, I believe will be the best two to examine based on their prominence. Um, I may investigate doing some level of quantitative initial surveys to identify which brands would be the best to cover, but for the purposes of this, the two that I've chosen are Aunt Jemima, which in 2020 rebranded to Pearl Milling Company. Aunt Jemima has existed as a brand for about 200 years. Pearl Milling Company refers to the original company that created the brand. Um, as you can see with this brand, elements of the brand signature were retained, like the typeface and the colors and the basic layout. The bottles remain the same, but the name itself and the primary image were removed. And the second brand I selected is Land O'Lakes. Land O'Lakes is a farmer cooperative that produces dairy products. Their brand in 2020, they removed a stereotypical image of a Native American from their branding. And again, similar to Aunt Jemima, they retained elements of the brand signature. They did retain their name, however, kind of part of their primary long-standing brand signature was removed at that time. And so moving forward into methodology, um, the plan is for data to be gathered through a two-pronged qualitative approach. While qualitative research has its place, most of the current research into brand signatures and the new emerging studies I found on this situation are all quantitative. So I believe a qualitative approach could provide unique data that delves more deeply into the personal stories and impact, as well as looking at the themes that emerge from the perceptions of these brands, both from the media at the time and from individuals. And so the first step will be analyzing the coverage before, during, and after the rebranding. The second will be conducting interviews with college-age adults, and the focus during those interviews will be their perceptions of the brands and the rebranding. So the coverage of brands will be used to kind of shape and these interview questions and to help code and analyze data. And the interviews, I believe, will provide really in-depth insights into the impact that these changes had both before and after. And so I mentioned it's two-prong. And so to get more in depth on the first aspect, I plan to do a directive qualitative content analysis of the press releases and news coverage of these brands, both before, soon before, during, and after the rebrandings. So press releases and descriptions of the brands come from the companies themselves. How are these companies describing their brands? How are they justifying it? How are they justifying brands? How are they communicating the change? Are they upfront about the change, or do they, try to reduce their kind of minimize the impact of these stereotypes? News coverage will be from outside reputable newspapers, hopefully a good pool, and that will analyze the framing used by the media of these brands and examining, agenda setting theory as we move into the next step. And so with directive content analysis, the reason I chose that over conventional or summative, I think coding based on some framing theory and agenda setting theory and these theories on brand identity is important, but allowing expansion beyond that as codes emerge is also important. And so trying to not let that past data shape my analysis too much, but still having kind of a roots in these theories. And this content analysis will then help guide the questions for the interviews. So that second phase will be one-on-one interviews, and those interview subjects will be college-age students, and they will be selected using convenient sampling. With that, I want to take care to ensure that there's a diverse and representative sample. I think that's really important as we look at the impact of these brands on people's lives. And I think it will be interesting as we can compare and contrast different peoples of different backgrounds and different ethnicities, how they were impacted by these rebrandings. These interviews will be semi-structured, with certain questions being asked in each interview. I believe semi-structured is the way to go, as it will allow a deeper exploration, and rapport is so important, and so building that and allowing their thoughts and themes to come through is important to me, telling their stories of these brands and their lives, but I want to keep some of those certain questions the same so we can have direct comparisons as well. These interviews will take place in a mutually agreed upon place with sufficient privacy, of course. Again, instead of the same place every time, I want these to be places where these subjects feel comfortable, but still have, privacy as well. My current plan is for 15 interviews. I believe this will give a good amount of data without being overwhelming. and these should be no more than 30 minutes. That'll be watched as I go through them. The plan for analyzing this data is that they will be recorded in full and transcribed by me, the researcher. Those transcripts will then be analyzed, again using directive qualitative content analysis to allow codes to emerge and to analyze themes in the data. And again, with that, recurring and unique themes will then be presented, and they'll also be compared and contrasted to my review of press. Did press coverage and did media coverage, or did the brand's own statements, did they knowingly or unknowingly make it into the minds of these consumers? Thank you for watching this video, and I've tried to keep it short. I know I can ramble a bit, so I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on this research proposal and for hearing your proposals as well. I've enjoyed this class with you all, and hope you have a good rest of your day.